Picture this. You're at a dinner party. Everyone is laughing politely, nodding in agreement, recycling the same tired opinions. It's a comfortable ritual, a performance everyone seems to understand. Then someone speaks, not just with volume, but with clarity. A single idea slices through the haze of small talk like a blade, and suddenly, the room goes quiet. Not the kind of quiet that invites reflection, the kind that reveals discomfort. People shift in their seats, they reach for their phones, eyes glance around, searching for a way back into the safe waters of superficiality. What you just witnessed was not awkwardness, it was fear, the ancient unspoken fear that society has always carried, the fear of intelligence. Not intelligence in the academic sense, but the kind that sees through, the kind that reflects, the kind that asks why we believe what we believe and doesn't stop at the first answer. This kind of presence doesn't fit in easily. It disturbs the ritual, it breaks the rhythm, and that in itself makes it threatening. But this fear is nothing new. Over 2 centuries ago, Arthur Schopenhauer saw it clearly. He understood that intelligence wasn't loved, it was endured, it wasn't welcomed, it was tolerated, if not outright rejected. And not because it lacked value, but because it made people look inward. Schopenhauer believed most people live in what he called the world of appearances, a place where surface matters more than depth, where comfort takes precedence over truth, where difficult questions are masked with pleasant distractions. And those who pierce that illusion, they're not praised, they're isolated. Think about it. When was the last time someone said, "I love being around people who challenge my beliefs and expose my blind spots"? Almost never, because we don't crave growth as much as we crave comfort. We don't seek truth, we seek confirmation. So what happens to the person who sees the flaws in the system, who notices the cracks in the performance? They become the outsider. Imagine you're watching a film with friends, a feel-good story, inspirational, safe, forgettable. Everyone's smiling. But you see the plot holes. You notice how neatly it all wraps up. You sense how it avoids the real weight of life, the grief, the doubt, the failure, the silence. You don't speak up, of course, because if you do, you become the one who ruined the mood, the one who takes things too seriously. This is the quiet burden of intelligence. It doesn't make you better, it makes you lonelier, not because you want to be alone, but because it's hard to find a place where your full presence is welcome. Schopenhauer called it the burden of consciousness. The more aware you become, the less you can go back. The less you can laugh at things that aren't funny, believe things that aren't true, pretend things are fine when they're clearly not. It's like being sober in a world that's constantly drunk on distraction. And the more clearly you see, the more resistance you meet. Because if your questions are valid, then others might have to question too. And most aren't ready for that. So they avoid you, they label you, they dismiss you, not because you're wrong, but because you make them uncomfortable. Let's get honest about why society truly fears intelligent people. It's not because they're more successful. It's not even because they're more capable. It's because they don't play along. Society, at its core, runs on silent agreements. We agree to value paper as money. We agree to follow unspoken rules in conversation. We agree that a 9-to-5 job and a mortgage equals a successful life. Most people nod along. They don't question these agreements because questioning them feels dangerous. But intelligent people, they ask, why? Why do we spend decades in jobs we hate to afford things we don't need? Why do we praise conformity and label dissent as arrogance? Why do we assume that being liked is more important than being real? These aren't small questions. These are existential detonators. And when someone detonates them in public, in a classroom, in a family gathering, in a boardroom, it unsettles everyone. Because deep down, most people have the same doubts. They just buried them, covered them with comfort, distraction, and routine. Schopenhauer understood this tension perfectly. He wrote that people aren't truly afraid of truth. They're afraid of what truth might destroy. And intelligence, the real kind, is inherently destructive, not in a violent way, in a clarifying way. It removes illusions. It asks uncomfortable questions. It exposes contradictions. That's why it feels threatening. Not because it attacks, but because it reveals. And when someone sees through the illusion society clings to, money, status, appearance, tradition, they stop being relatable. They become the mirror no one wants to look into. So what does society do with mirrors it doesn't like? It turns them around. It silences them. Or worse, mocks them. They think they're better than everyone else. They overanalyze everything. They're too negative. But these aren't real criticisms. They're defense mechanisms. Because when someone exposes our delusions, we don't question the delusion. We question the person. It's easier to dismiss someone than to admit they might be right. Easier to label them difficult than to confront what they're pointing to. And so the cycle continues. Intelligent people ask hard questions. Society gets uncomfortable. Society labels them. They withdraw. And in that silence, society breathes easier, unaware of how much it loses every time it pushes away the ones who think too deeply. There's something deeply human about the way people react to intelligence. It isn't logical, it's primal. Schopenhauer noticed it long before neuroscience caught up. People don't just disagree with intelligent voices, they react to them the way they would to a threat. The body tenses, the heart rate quickens, defenses rise. Why? Because when someone challenges your worldview, they're not just challenging ideas, they're challenging identity. And identity is sacred territory. If you've built your entire life on the belief that hard work always leads to happiness, what happens when someone shows you the exception? If you've been taught that love conquers all, what happens when someone explains love through biology, trauma, or evolutionary wiring? You don't just hear a new perspective. You feel exposed. You feel like something in you has been questioned, not just your opinions, but your sense of meaning. And so people react, not always with fists, but with silence, with sarcasm, with distance, because it's exhausting to be around someone who sees through you. And intelligent people, they often don't even mean to do it. It's not malice, it's perception. They notice when someone's words don't match their body language. They sense tension in a room others call normal. They hear what wasn't said. This is why so many intelligent people feel like they're always editing themselves, dimming their light, shrinking their thoughts into more digestible portions. Not because they want to, but because they've learned what happens when they don't. They've been called arrogant when they were just honest. They've been told they're too intense when they were simply paying attention. They've been excluded not because they were wrong, but because they were right too soon. And so they learn to smile, to nod, to say less. But the cost of that self-silencing is immense. Over time, it erodes your sense of belonging. You start to feel like a stranger in your own world, as if you're speaking a language no one around you understands. And eventually, you start to wonder if maybe you're the problem. But you're not. There's nothing wrong with seeing clearly in a world that prefers fog. There's nothing wrong with thinking deeply in a culture addicted to distraction. It's just that clarity has always been uncomfortable. And those who carry it have always had to choose between being understood and being true to themselves. Now let's go deeper into the unspoken fear that surrounds intelligence. It's not just the questions intelligent people ask, it's the way they see. Most of us spend our lives crafting an image. Carefully, deliberately. We curate our photos. We fine-tune our words. We build personas that look competent, confident, desirable. We rehearse our roles, the reliable son, the ambitious employee, the charming friend. We want to be perceived a certain way. And most people, politely, unconsciously, play along. They don't look too closely. They don't ask why you seem tired behind your smile. They don't challenge your story, but intelligent people do. They don't mean to tear down the mask. They just see through it. They notice when your voice cracks ever so slightly while you say, "I'm fine." They see the forced joy in your celebration post. They sense the emptiness behind your success. Not because they're trying to expose you, but because their minds are trained to look beneath the surface. They connect dots others miss. They pick up patterns others dismiss. They feel inconsistencies others ignore. And that's terrifying, because suddenly you're not in control of the story anymore. You're seen, unfiltered, raw, human. And most people aren't ready for that kind of exposure. So they push away the one who sees. They say you're overthinking it, or you're being too serious, or worse, you always make things complicated. But these aren't reflections of your flaws. They're reflections of their discomfort. You didn't break their story. You just refused to believe it without looking closer. And that makes you dangerous in the most honest way. Because intelligence doesn't just ask questions, it offers mirrors. And not everyone wants to be mirrored. Some would rather stay in the comfort of the performance than face the discomfort of truth. That's why intelligent people are often mislabeled. Reserved becomes antisocial. Honest becomes arrogant. Curious becomes rebellious. The tragedy is, these labels aren't even about the intelligent person. They're about the people who feel seen in ways they didn't consent to. But here's the twist. This dynamic is not a condemnation. It's a call. A call to develop the courage to be seen. A call to let go of roles that no longer fit. And for the intelligent person, it's a reminder. You are not here to make others comfortable. You are here to see clearly, to speak truth, to ask what no one dares to ask, even if it means standing alone. Schopenhauer once wrote that most people live lives of quiet desperation, following routines they never questioned, pursuing goals they never truly chose. They move from milestone to milestone, checking boxes handed to them by family, culture, media. Success becomes a performance, and happiness, often a marketing slogan. But intelligent people don't perform well in these roles, not because they lack discipline, but because they ask, what's the point? What's the point of earning more if you're spiritually bankrupt? What's the point of being admired if you can't respect yourself? What's the point of reaching the top if the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall? These questions are unsettling, not just for the person asking them, but for everyone around. Because if one person dares to question the script, it threatens the entire stage. And most people would rather protect the illusion than rewrite the story. That's why society resists people who think deeply, because they don't just rebel against mediocrity, they reveal it. They shine light on the shallow definitions of success. They challenge the glorification of busyness. They expose how often we trade authenticity for approval. And society doesn't want that kind of rebellion. It wants conformity with flair, individuality within safe limits. It wants you to think, but not too much. Question, but not too deeply. Feel, but only the pleasant emotions. So when someone breaks that mold, they don't just stand out, they stand apart. Not because they choose loneliness, but because there are few places in society where real depth is welcomed. And that kind of isolation, it's not just external, it creeps inward. You begin to wonder if maybe silence is safer than sincerity, if maybe blending in is better than being misunderstood. But deep down, you know that's not the answer, because you weren't made to echo. You were made to challenge. You weren't made to follow. You were made to think. You weren't made to be liked. You were made to live in alignment with truth. And yes, that truth might be heavy. It might cost you relationships, opportunities, approval, but it gives you something far more valuable: inner integrity, quiet strength, clarity in a noisy world. And in time, those who once resisted your depth may find themselves drawn to it. Not because you changed, but because they finally got tired of the surface. Here's what I admire most about truly intelligent people. They have the courage to stand alone, not out of pride, not out of defiance, but because they simply refuse to betray what they know to be true. They won't laugh at a lie just to keep the peace. They won't nod along with the crowd if the direction feels wrong. They won't shrink their mind to fit into a space that punishes depth. That's not arrogance. That's integrity. It takes quiet strength to hold your truth in a room where everyone else has abandoned theirs. It takes patience to be misunderstood again and again without letting that bitterness harden your heart. But society doesn't always see it that way. It mistakes independence for superiority. It reads moral courage as rebellion. It sees solitude and assumes something must be broken. And so the cycle deepens. The more intelligent people stand firm, the more they're misread. The more they're misread, the more they withdraw. The more they withdraw, the more they're seen as distant, difficult, or disconnected. But the truth is, most of them don't want to be apart from others. They just want to be in a space where they can be real, where conversation doesn't feel like performance, where vulnerability isn't mistaken for weakness, where depth isn't punished by awkward silence. Because contrary to what people assume, intelligent people don't crave being right. They crave connection, real, unfiltered, soul-level connection. And that only happens when both people can drop the mask, when both people can say, "I don't know," and mean it. When both people can admit that truth matters more than comfort. That's rare, but it exists. And when it happens, it's transformative. Because two minds that dare to meet at that depth without pretension, without fear, they don't just exchange ideas. They shift something inside each other. They walk away changed, seen, strengthened, aligned. That's the true reward of intelligence, not status, not admiration, but resonance. Finding someone who doesn't just tolerate your depth, but reflects it. And until that moment comes, it's okay to walk alone. Better to walk alone in truth than be surrounded by comfort built on illusion. Because those who walk with truth eventually cross paths with others who do the same. And when they meet, it's not noise, it's not performance, it's presence. Despite all the misunderstanding and resistance, intelligent people offer something society desperately needs: a mirror, a compass, a conscience. They're the ones who notice the things others ignore. They're the ones who ask the questions no one dares to ask. They're the ones who refuse to settle for easy answers to hard problems. And yes, that makes them uncomfortable to be around. But it also makes them essential, because without them, we drift. Without them, we confuse popularity with truth. We mistake appearance for substance. We reward those who shout the loudest, not those who think the deepest. That's what we see now more than ever. Social media has amplified this divide. The loudest voices dominate, not the wisest ones. Nuance gets flattened into slogans, questions get dismissed as negativity, and intelligence gets rebranded as elitism. But Schopenhauer saw this long before Twitter existed. He understood that intelligence wasn't just a cognitive trait, it was a burden, a responsibility, a quiet call to keep seeing, even when others close their eyes. And that burden can feel heavy. Because intelligent people aren't trying to be different. They just are. They don't crave isolation. They just end up there because there's so little room for honest thought in a world built on agreeable illusions. But here's the truth that often gets lost. The isolation isn't a prison, it's a filter. It filters out noise, distractions, shallow approval, and it leaves behind something quieter, something more solid: self-respect, clarity, presence, and eventually resonance. Because there are others who think like you, who feel the same ache, who see the same cracks in the surface. They're just scattered, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone else to break the silence first. So if you're someone who's been made to feel like your depth is too much, hear this. It's not too much. It's what this world is starving for. In a culture that rewards distraction, your focus is a gift. In a system built on noise, your silence is powerful. In a society afraid of truth, your honesty is revolutionary. You don't need to perform. You don't need to be palatable. You don't need to apologize for thinking deeply and feeling fully. Because one day, those who once misunderstood your questions may come searching for your answers. Your intelligence is not a problem to solve. It's not a character flaw. It's not a wound that needs healing. And it's certainly not something you need to hide in order to be loved. It is a responsibility, a quiet flame you carry through a world that often prefers shadows. You will be misunderstood, not because you're unclear, but because clarity itself is often unwelcome. You will be judged, not because you are wrong, but because truth unsettles those who live comfortably in illusion. You will feel alone, not because you're incapable of connection, but because deep connection is rare, and most people are still afraid of their own depth. But here's what you must remember. You are not alone in this. There are others, scattered, silent, searching, just like you. People who've grown tired of the noise, people who crave something real, people who see the cracks in the story and still choose to care. And when you find them, not by force, but through presence, you'll feel it. Not in the words, in the way your nervous system finally exhales, in the way you no longer need to translate yourself into something more acceptable. This is the quiet power of living in alignment with what is true. You stop chasing applause. You stop fearing rejection. You stop bending just to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And in that stillness, you find something greater than acceptance. You find peace. Arthur Schopenhauer spent much of his life being dismissed, isolated, ignored. But time caught up to him. His work outlived the voices that rejected it. And today, his thoughts shape the very frameworks people now rely on to understand themselves. That's the gift of staying true. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to live honestly, to think clearly, to speak gently, even when the truth cuts deep. And if you do that, if you remain loyal to your depth even in a shallow world, you don't just survive, you lead, quietly, bravely, without ever needing to prove yourself. You become the reminder that someone else needed. You become the light someone else was looking for. You become the proof that it's possible to live without pretending. And in a world drowning in noise, that is the most powerful thing of all.